Talking is great. It is. It's an avenue by which we can fellowship and share the Word of God. It really is. But we're here for the breakthrough, the change in your life, the absolute breakthrough, the chains breaking, right? That the gospel increase in your life, become evident in your life, that your shadow become a healing to somebody else. And that means the Word and all the work that we're doing here, right? You are the evidence of that Word, and your personal breakthroughs are key to everything. That's what we're here for. Not so much for the talks, not so much for the information thing, but for the breakthrough. And we have a lot of groundwork to do. We've been engaged in activities for what, 30 some years now? And you guys are about to be involved in quite a few expansive works. And we always work toward that breakthrough. For example, a family who is, they're doing okay, but they have oppressing chains on them. Things they deal with, reoccurring problems and issues. Who's going to stand with that family? Who will help that family when everybody else cuts them loose? Who would take that time to be available for them? And that takes a massive amount of people, right? As we expand doing this, it's going to take a lot. It's just like me at maximum. I can, by myself can handle no more than about 50 to 100 families. That's it. Because you're going to be in their situation with them, right? It really is going to war. But it's prayer, guidance, right? A friend to talk to, a voice of reason in times of panic, a voice of vision when great blindness is all over the place, presenting the light of Christ in those areas of darkness. Most importantly, having that person choose Christ in all aspects of life and seeing that breakthrough, destroying these repetitious patterns of defeat, depression, bondage of mind and body. That's what we're here for, to make that impact. That is the gospel. The gospel is not simply words, right? A way to live your life. Not simply giving instruction, but to come alongside someone and to do what hardly anybody else in these times will do. There are some out there doing it. There are not many though. Jesus said one time that the crops, he was talking about the harvest, he said it's ready, but the laborers are few. That still rings true today. That reflects in our society. Many of these disconnects, opposing views in the world, these issues that we have, that's clear evidence that there are chains, massive chains, invisible chains attached to so many things. And it only takes one person to really start that fire of deliverance. And that catches on. My mission, in part, is of a volunteer basis to go out there in the field, whatever part of the field we're sent, to assist in that harvest. And that begins with you guys, so that your households are different. So people look at you and say there's something different about you, so that you're not depressed, so that the nature of your communications change, so that you're stable, your foot is on solid ground, you're not tossed about anymore, so that you can be a blessing to somebody else. And once you rub off on them, they'll be a blessing to somebody else. For us, it's not about quantity. It's really about quality, thoroughness. That takes a lot. And we're really about to begin that, with you guys being included. I had to remind you about that because, as you may or may not know, there are lots of changes in this world, things that haven't been seen in thousands of years that are beginning to resurface. Attention grabbers that, if we're not careful, we can go back on some of the exits that we took many, many years ago. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves in the exact same position we were delivered from. These days are going to become very confusing for those who have no foundation. They're going to need someone just like you to lean on during their times of struggle and mental struggles. You may or may not know that some of the forces of earth are going to affect the physical body, specifically the mind. People's capabilities, they won't be there like they used to be. That's going to require many of us to have much more patience with the average person, not becoming frustrated or trying to communicate something, but to realize and understand it's all about being a vessel that the Lord may give them sight so they can see for themselves. And as we continue, the gospel of Jesus Christ will become more and more offensive to many because it will go against the lifestyles, the chosen way of life that people have chosen. And it will be harsh to a great many. It'll be harsh because it does not agree with what they have chosen to be in this world. But while there's still time, while it's still day, I don't know about you, but I choose to work. And work overtime, most of the time. In the beginning of that process of your freedom, sometimes, often, not only do you inspect your own foundations, but you have to ensure that you realize why you're here in the first place. See, if Satan can define your cause for being here, or if he can put a question mark in your mind and make you doubt why you're here, he can really confuse your path going forward. Many of you understand that because in your days of your pursuit of information, you wanted to know who you were, what you came from, and believe it or not, it is not your Father in heaven who would originate such a question in us, like who we come from. No, because he gives us revelation to realize where we come from and why we're here. It is Satan that throws in these curveballs that will cause a person to reevaluate what they come from and why they're here. We have to be reminded and remind ourselves, and as many as would listen, of what the Lord said, because we are the Father's creation. That's what we are. We are here for his purpose, not ours. Believe it or not, if a great percentage of people would realize they're not here for their own purpose, they would begin to find true joy in their lives. You may ask, how does that work? Because if you're here for somebody else's purpose, wouldn't they be more like bondage? Here's the twist. You ready? Many people have tried to define why they're here, and they have put on the face of joy. No one sees them in the quiet of their own home, in their days of darkness, when things are not working out so well. But while people are defining who they are, trying to make their own paradise and forge their own path in life, the Lord has predestined them a certain path. Now, in this path is everything they long for, everything they cry for, everything they truly desire of the Spirit that can fulfill them upon obtaining it. Nothing of the flesh can fulfill you. It can only tease you. Those things of the Spirit can fulfill you. And to be frank with you, a lot of people have not experienced fulfillment. They've only had temporary happiness. but it went away. Joy is eternal. And what the Lord has for all of us is joy, not happiness, joy. He has fulfillment. It's like many of you, when you were growing up, you had a deep yearning inside for someone to love you. You found it difficult to find that in the world, period. You tried to fill it with so many things, and it didn't work. Because we didn't know that we were born with a void, a purposed void. And that purposed void is so that we find our way back to the Father, because Christ is the only one that can fulfill that void. Nobody else can. In that path of Christ is the fulfillment of that void. See, because in that moment, you will never feel alone again. Not ever. Your flesh tells the story, and sometimes it tells the truth. Because no matter how spiritual a person may seem to become, many struggle with the loneliness, don't they? Can you for a moment imagine your life where you do not have that feeling ever again? That feeling of being alone, I mean, it's totally gone. Can you imagine that feeling of emptiness never returning again? I'm telling you it's possible. It's more than possible. It is for you. It is set aside for you. Nobody else can get it but you. It is set in the way that the Lord has for you in this earth. And these things we ought to be reminded of. Because these things are the path our Father laid out for us. It is not labor intensive. See, because any labor that you do in the world, normally is for compensation. Do you know what happens when you step into that path of love and you want to do something out of love for someone? It's no longer labor. It becomes a joyful work. It becomes a task, almost like a debt that you enjoy to repay. You're never tired. Many people are tired because they have been doing their own planning. They planned out their spiritual walk. I tell you, I give you a challenge. Allow the Lord to lay out your spiritual walk and experience the difference. There's still time for you to gain experience. And what I'm talking about here, so that you know, you don't have to guess all your life. You don't have to assume all your life. You don't have to theorize all your life. You can know. All you have to do is step into it. Begin to walk His way. And speaking about walking His way, due to these dangerous days, these very deceitful days, a focus we will always have, no matter what people are reading. For example, there's nothing in your life that ever took place without your Father knowing it, being an intimate part of it. Do you know that? Many of you understand the basis of science, right? Some of you understand the basis of electronics. How do you think it is man has come to learn how to manipulate fluids, the movement of fluids, or study the movement of air, all of its fluid dynamics, or to control electrons and protons in their movement and in their speed, so much so that it yields things like computers? How do we get to do that? You ready? Because all the elements God created, they follow a path. There are rules involved, right? So they perform in a very predictive manner. Nothing is out of control. Nothing is random. They are controlled in a very predictive manner. If they were not, right, existing with some sort of very high order, we could never study their properties. We can never study their patterns enough to control them. We can only control those things that we find rules to. Do you know that? That's what science does. They find out specific rules, which is a way that something works all the time. They extract that becomes a formula. Then they apply that to other things, and all of a sudden you have some usage of that element, right? That compound element, whatever the case is. But it all begins by man studying what rules lie around certain things. What rules will an electron or a proton play? What rules does radiation have? Who set these rules? Our Father did. By his spoken word, which is so much more than what we think of as speech. Remember, God is spirit, so when he spoke the word, he did not speak it with a mouth. Think about that. When God speaks, we're the ones that have a mouth, vocal cords, and all that, right? In the Bible, it says that God is spirit. Therefore, we must worship him in spirit and in truth. So he doesn't need a mouth. So when he speaks, we know it's a higher form than what we can comprehend. All too often, we put God in a box. We humanize him. We relate him to us. We're in the image and likeness of him. But he's not like us. That image and likeness of him would be part of your heart and your spirit, not so much how you look. For a person who thinks only of flesh, for comprehension's sake, they'll equate that to the flesh. In so doing, men have written books full of errors based upon a premise that God is like us physically. But we know what Jesus said. He defined it spiritually, not physically. Only the one who is absent spiritual insight would relate God to the flesh. But Jesus clearly stated, God is not flesh, nor is he relatable to the flesh. And our likeness and our image is after him by way of the Spirit, something you can see, but all too often you cannot acknowledge everything you see. Having said all of this, your life has never been out of control. But we've not always chosen the Father's way for our lives. And there's some basic things we must be reminded of. They're good things. They're not heavy. They're not difficult. It's not somebody who's long-winded going to read a list of them to you. No, they're very simple. And one of them is a recognition of who we are. We are children of the Most High. We are here for his purpose, for his pleasure. And it just so happens that God's pleasure is your full deliverance. God's pleasure is your full healing. God's pleasure is your absolute prosperity of the Spirit. God's pleasure is that you always be delivered. God's pleasure is that you know the truth. God's pleasure is that you have liberty. God's pleasure is that you be absolutely free. That being his pleasure, now you know what he wants of you, to give you that. And in order for you to obtain those things, you must walk behind him. Why? You were born in a womb, just like the human body is full of different fluids and chemicals and things of that nature, right? You're not born that way, sloppy. You're born, why? Because all those components, they reached an order. They had instruction. That those instructions were complex and they form you. Then out of that soup, you were born. A magnificent being, right? Out of a soup. I do not subscribe to Darwin's theory of evolution. I do subscribe to the Father's methods and ways, how they overlap one another. When he describes one thing, he describes everything. And when he describes everything, he describes the single smallest thing. Because if you examine the inside of the body, you can know what the universe is. And if you ever saw the universe, you would understand the inside of the body. That's how our Father works. From the habits of animals to ants, we can see our own potential. We can also see the will of God and his ways and methods. We can see his intent, his purpose, and our purpose from all of what he made. God gave you something else that's called dominion, and too many people are not exercising dominion as God has instructed them to, but rather they become victims of their environment. You're never to be a victim of your environment. God gave you dominion. Even right now you have dominion. You may not know it, but you have dominion. There are a set of scriptures in the Bible dealing with faith. One says, as a man speaketh, so is he. Why is that true? Well, I'm going to discuss something of a spiritual nature, but something very real that has to do with faith, both a caution and a challenge dealing with faith. Now remember, faith absent the Father is called what? Witchcraft, isn't it? Did you know that? If your faith is not in righteous things, that is witchcraft. There are lots of things we don't know. Lots of things we don't know. And Jesus is always faithful to forgive us of those things. We have no idea of what we're doing. He will cover us by his blood. But in those areas he has given us insight into, we must be reminded of them and to do them according to righteousness. Being careful not only for ourselves, but always remember that your life is connected to so many others.